Daniel Miller is the president of the Texas Nationalist Movement and joins us with some of his latest thoughts this morning. Mr. Miller, welcome back, sir.
Hey, good morning. Glad to be back.
Glad to have you. Thank you for taking time for us this morning. I appreciate it. So give us Secession 101 and the Texas Nationalist Movement 101 here to kind of lay the groundwork. Who are you? What's your group? What's your organization? What do you stand for?
Sure. Our organization was founded back in 2005, and our mission is pretty straightforward. We're after the political, cultural, and economic independence of Texas. At the end of the day, you want to get down to brass tacks, you can wrap it up in one word, and that's Texit. We want to fulfill Sam Houston's words when he said that Texas will again lift its head and stand among the nations. And, that singular message since 2005 has driven our organization to become one of the largest political organizations in Texas. We're the second largest independence movement in the Western Hemisphere beside the Quebecois, and one of the largest in the entire world. And, it is really and truly about harnessing this fundamental belief and feeling from Texans that we don't need 2.5 million unelected bureaucrats dictating to us how we live our lives. We're absolutely sick and tired of being crushed under 180,000 pages of federal laws, rules, and regulations, and overpaying $103 to $160 billion a year into a federal sinkhole. Texans believe that the best people to govern Texas are Texans.
Mm-hmm. Other than an idea, boy, and that sounds good to me. I think many people say, I'm sick of them too. I'm absolutely sick of them too. Other than the freedom and the liberty from the swamp, in great part, if we can call it that, what are the other pros, in your opinion, the benefits to Texas and Texans of secession?
Well, look, there's obviously, enormous economic benefits. I mentioned one aspect of the economic argument, which is that, $100 billion plus overpayment that we make into the federal government every year. I mean, imagine what we could do with that money if it stayed here in Texas, or even better, in our own pockets. Right? I mean, imagine, Texas going from the 9th or 10th largest economy in the world to, say, the 4th, 5th, or 6th, making those kind of jumps. So there is an economic argument. But look, Chris, I just want to break it down to make it about as simple as possible. All you have to do is look at the election results and realize over half of the population across the United States voted for candidates who openly espoused neo-Marxist and socialist doctrine. Mm-hmm. And as Texans, we have to ask ourselves, can we be in an absolute political and economic union with people, over half of which believe in some of the principles, if not most of the principles, of Karl Marx? And I would say that most Texans are not even on board with that, and including some Democrats. So, we've got to, if we want to talk about the pros, ultimately the pro is that of self-government. We need a Texas where our decisions stay here, our decisions are made here, and not like the current status quo where 40% of our legislation that's going on in the Texas legislature is effectively dictated out of Washington, D.C.
What are some of the biggest cons that people bring up, some of the concerns, some of the things that they don't like about the idea, and what are your responses to those? Let's begin with national defense. That's one of the things that just comes to my mind, not understanding this issue from A to Z, certainly living in it like you do. And I'm thinking, so we've got to defend ourselves then again, so we got to defend our own border, and I know a lot of that falls on us now too. But we're going to have to defend it all. And if we come under attack by another nation, if we have seceded from the United States of America, then the United States of America might say, sorry, you wanted your own? Good luck, Texas. What about, let's begin with national defense, and we'll go down through two or three others that come to mind here.
Yeah, I mean, the national defense issue, first and foremost, it is typically the opposition wraps it up in that. Well, what if we're invaded from outside? Well, who would that be? And would that national security or defense concern also not concern our neighbors, right? And typically the boogeyman is China. Some people, insinuate that maybe Mexico will invade, and then I have to remind them that we have more people in our organization than Mexico has in their entire military, so I don't think that's a real threat. But let's get down to real practical terms, like they had to discuss during the Brexit discussions or the Scottish independence. Let's talk about this in real policy terms. First and foremost, we remember that we're keeping all of our money here, right? So no more giant sucking sound toward Washington, D.C. to $103 to $160 billion a year. So that stays here. Then you begin to look at how we allocate that money. And if Texas were to, say, spend the 4% on defense spending, then what we're essentially talking, if we're talking about national defense, we already have what is essentially the skeletal framework through the Texas military department that we could begin to build a military off of. And if we just did sort of the minimum NATO guideline spending, we're going to have one of the most well-funded militaries in the world. So if Israel, tiny Israel, can defend itself surrounded by millions of people who shout death to their country, I'm pretty sure Texas is going to be all right.
What about Social Security and Medicare? Some people have paid into it for years, and then you say goodbye to the United States of America.
Right. One thing to bear in mind, and for the longest time, Chris, the Social Security question was one of the most asked, and I can understand why. Exactly what you said. People paid into this their entire lives. And what most people don't realize is once you've paid in to Social Security and you move out of the United States, you can actually still draw your Social Security. There are some exceptions according to the Social Security Administration. Countries like Cuba, North Korea, Belarus, you can't live in those countries and draw your Social Security. But pretty much everywhere else in the free world, you can move and still collect your Social Security. So that's not a big issue. One of the things that we do cover on our website at tnm.me is the sort of the nuance with that, how that would look at the end of the day if the United States said, okay, fine, we're just going to treat you like North Korea. We're not going to pay your people. Well, we actually break it down into real dollars and show that even if the United States federal government welched on its promises and stole every, hard-earned money from Texans, we would still have enough money to be able to cover that plus a whole lot more.
Are there other primary arguments that anti-secession people bring up in addition to things like national defense, Social Security, Medicare, those kinds of things? And if so, what are they, and what's your rebuttal, what's your response to them?
Yeah, Chris, there's so many aspects. We get questions all the time about, will Texas college teams still be able to play in the NCAA? And the answer to that is yes. They just cover the gamut. But what I think is a useful exercise here is to reverse the question and say, okay, if Texas were an independent nation right now, and someone came knocking on your door and said, hey, would you be interested in Texas joining the United States? What would that argument be? What would your answer be? What is their selling point for staying? Is it the, near $30 trillion worth of debt? Is that one of the selling points? Is it the fact that no matter what we decide as voters here, we can be overridden at the stroke of a pen by some black-robed priest who wants us to worship at the feet of Washington, D.C.? What exactly is their selling point for staying? And time again, we see the opposition rock back on their heels with that one question, and they cannot name what the selling point is for us to be a part of the Union.
What does the political environment look like in Texas right now? What do you hear from the Texas legislators, our senators, our state representatives, our governor's office? What do they say about this secession idea as a whole?
Well, unfortunately, our governor, since he was Attorney General, has had his sights set on sitting in the Oval Office. So He's never been a friend to Texas independence. But one of the things that we have seen steadily has been this growth of independence sentiment within the Texas legislature. Now, will we see that boil over into support in this next legislative session, full-on public support by filing our referendum legislation? We may. We saw on, a couple Tuesdays ago that all bets are sort of off at this point. There's so much has changed in the political landscape as individual Texans and elected officials are coming to grips with what the next 4 years may look like. Mm-hmm. So, we're going to see some serious, I think, discussions in the legislative session, and I feel very confident that we may get legislation filed in this session.
Instead of secession, what about just pushing for the Convention of States and call for the Convention of States? That number of states that evidently supports that idea is growing. And then you could get the Convention of States, a provision under the U.S. Constitution. You could hopefully force through things like a balanced budget amendment, like maybe term limits, I think are some of their priorities, remaining a part of the United States of America, but going another constitutional route to address some of these issues. And obviously, if you force through a constitutional amendment that says you can't spend more than you bring in, with a balanced budget amendment, that would obviously bring a lot of this crazy spending under control, whether it's Republicans, Democrats, or both spending us into oblivion.
Well, Chris, two points. Number one is, if the federal government were fixable, if it were redeemable, pretty sure that over the last 60 years, as people have talked about this very thing, it would have been done, and it hasn't been. It's only gotten worse. So to the second point, which is this Convention of States issue, just so we're clear, what the Article 5 Convention of the States folks are saying is what we need to do is we need to essentially crack open the Constitution and let the same people that just voted half or more for neo-Marxist socialist candidates to tiptoe through our freedoms and our structure of government. And I've got to tell you, that is a recipe for disaster. Had we been talking about the Convention of States issue sometime back, I'm sure it might have had perhaps some appeal if you still had hope in reforming the federal government. But, how can we be in a union with people where we are not, we are absolutely political opposites? Mm-hmm. And beyond being political opposites, at the end of the day, the best solution for Texas is to reclaim our right of self-government. All of those solutions, even the Article 5 Convention, still puts our future, our political destiny, in the hands of people who are not us. Why is it that our political future must be dictated by people in Pennsylvania or California or New York? Why can't our political destiny be dictated by Texans and Texans only? That's why the TNM has grown, because of that message. And that's why we've seen in 2005 Texas polling at single digits. And now, most recent polls show well over a majority of Republicans, over half of independents, and even a third of Democrats believe that Texas should go it alone.
Well, boy, yeah, that certainly reminds us of what we're hearing from many today, and certainly in the mainstream media and the left now, of course, that they have refused to accept the results of the 2016 election solid day after day, minute after minute for 4 years. Then we need to shut up and just go ahead and take our medicine and accept the results of this election and move on. And then we need to work together. We need to come together. And many of us are saying there is no common ground between capitalism and socialism. There is no common ground between these kooks, these nut jobs, and those of us that are God-fearing, America-loving patriots in this country. Don't even talk to me about working across the aisle with these idiots. I think many people that you're talking to right now agree with that 100%.
Well, think about it, Chris. The only time we hear cries of unity out of those guys is when they are in power and they want us to acquiesce to some sort of, politically, morally, or economically reprehensible action, right? The cries of unity. But I want you to remember this, and it's already started, right? But back in 2000, when the Bush-Gore issue was being decided, and it fell in favor of Bush, every single one of the liberal media outlets were publishing op-ed pieces and editorials and articles talking about the Democratic states seceding from the Union. Okay? So I want you to remember that, because when the time comes, and if this thing falls Biden's way, they will, as they have done time and time again, come gunning for us and talk about how secession is unconstitutional, it's illegal, it's un-American, it's treason, it's sedition. They will say all of those things out of the exact same mouths where they professed it. And I will tell you, those same people are making the rounds in liberal media right now, talking about that very issue, that if this happens because of the court challenges, happens to fall to Trump, they're talking about California and Oregon and New York and all those states potentially seceding. So, they have, they pretty much have a lock on hypocrisy, right? I mean, if you look it up in the dictionary, you're going to see pictures of the stars of the left over there. They are absolute hypocrites on this issue, and the only time they cry for a united states is when they are in charge and they can shove things down Texans' throats that we don't want.
Yeah. Amen to that. Amen to that. Support for this idea of Texas secession growing, and the Texas Nationalist Movement right in the middle of the fight. You can find out more, how to support, how to learn more. You make your own decisions. TNM for Texas Nationalist Movement, TNM.me. TNM.me. Daniel Miller is the president of the Texas Nationalist Movement. Mr. Miller, interesting thoughts. We appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Good to talk to you, sir. Happy Thanksgiving.